Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I first would like to let the Speaker know that I will be splitting my time with the member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith. If I could, and I will, Mr. Speaker, I would like to dedicate my remarks today to the late Dr. John Bury and his wife, Betsy, both local constituents of mine who have been working for peace for the past 60 years. Their efforts, a lifetime of dedication to peace, and particularly nuclear disarmament, were recognized and honored in our city when the couple were awarded the 2014 Joanna Miller Peace Prize. The Joanna Miller Peace Prize in Saskatoon was established in 2013 to honor the late Joanna Miller for her years of activism for peace, both within the Saskatoon community but globally as well. She was the president of UNICEF Canada, an active member of Project Ploughshares, and of particular note, because of the conversation we're having today, a special advisor on disarmament to the Canadian delegation of the United Nations. Both John and Betsy were veterans of World War II. Because of this shared experience, they realized we must work for peaceful resolutions to world conflicts. They were longtime active members of the Saskatoon branch of Veterans Against Nuclear Arms. Betsy no longer has John by her side. John died at the age of 92 just this past Christmas. The Saskatoon community will miss John and his thoughtful, well-researched letters to the editor in the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix. And I know Betsy and many, many of us in Saskatoon, others in my community, will continue to work for peace and disarmament in his honor. And so it is a privilege for me to rise today, Mr. Speaker, for an opportunity to speak on the Opposition Day motion and, of course, support it wholeheartedly. I'm sure my colleagues in this House have noticed that all around us there are frantic preparations are underway for the big Canada Day party that will be held here, of course, in Parliament Hill in a couple of weeks. As Canadians celebrate our nationhood and the country we call home, it behooves us to also reflect on our role on the world stage, past, present, and future. It is a matter of immense pride to Canadians that we have worked for peace, an end to apartheid and disarmament, no matter the party in power. It's true that Canada has lost some stature over the last decade or so, and with the election of the Liberals in 2015, we heard the claims, Mr. Speaker, that Canada was back. But sadly, Mr. Speaker, it does sound like another piece of empty rhetoric, because Canada cannot be back. We cannot be back if we continue to boycott the talks for a nuclear ban treaty. In the much-anticipated reveal of Canada's new foreign policy direction, the Minister of Foreign Affairs stood in this House and trumpeted that Canada would chart its own course, no longer in lockstep with the United States and in defiance of President Trump's wishes if they went against the best interests of Canada. Yet the Minister mentioned the United Nations last after mentioning 9 other multilateral forums the Liberals will support. There was absolutely nothing about the threat of nuclear weapons in her entire speech. Mr. Speaker, is this really how the government intends to win on the UN Security Council? If Canada is to get a seat on the UN Security Council, we need a campaign that is bold, global, and pertinent. Leading a global effort on nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament should be a cornerstone of that campaign. Instead, there has been deafening silence and a refusal to attend negotiations for a nuclear ban treaty. The need to act on nuclear disarmament is clear. Nuclear weapons threaten our collective existence, especially in the hands of non-state actors such as Daesh, also known as ISIS or ISIL, and belligerent countries such as North Korea. The financial cost to build, maintain, and refurbish nuclear weapons is totally unsustainable. The proliferation of nuclear weapons also, of course, raises the risk of false alarms that could lead to inadvertent use. In the late 80s and 90s, incredible global progress was made in the reduction of nuclear weapons, leading to a period of peace and prosperity. Then the momentum was lost in the early 2000s following 9/11. In 2007, there was a resurgence of optimism with a surprisingly idealistic op-ed by George Shultz, William Perry, and Henry A. Kissinger and Sam Nunn titled "A World Free of Nuclear Weapons." This bipartisan offering pleaded with the world to get serious about nuclear disarmament. This was followed in April 2009 by President Obama's historic speech in Prague that echoed President Reagan's vision and then UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon's 5-point plan on the subject in August that same year. But sadly, since that time, we have seen very little, if any, progress. The world needs leadership and action on nuclear disarmament, and Canada, more than any other country, is well positioned to move things forward. It's important to remember the political and historical capital we have to make significant impact on nuclear disarmament. As a country that has never developed nuclear weapons, we have some credibility. As a G7 nation and a member of NATO, the Commonwealth, and the Francophonie, we have a global connectivity, and we have some of the best experts in diplomacy, science, and verification of nuclear weapons. No other country has these claims. In the face of this challenge, are we ready to put forward a serious idea that will allow Canada to take its place at the UN Security Council and contribute to a more stable world? I hope and think the answer must be yes. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I was honored to listen to a survivor of Hiroshima, Setsuko Thurlow, speak and advocate for a world without nuclear weapons. We all know the powerful, destructive impact these weapons have. Every high school student studies the end of the Second World War, and every August we remember the victims and events that led to the use of these devastating weapons. And yet we live in a world where nuclear arsenals are multiplying. 95% of nuclear weapons are held between the United States and Russia. Furthermore, other nations strive to obtain these weapons as a measure of strength. 9 nations, including our allies, hold over, as has been mentioned, but it is worth mentioning again, 15,000 nuclear warheads. A single one can kill millions of people and, of course, destroy the surrounding environment for decades. We lived through the fear that permeated the Cold War and now live in fear of non-state actors acquiring these weapons. Unregulated, uncontrolled, and unmonitored nuclear development leaves Canadians, leaves our world vulnerable. In 2010, Parliament unanimously passed a motion to seek a way to negotiate an end to nuclear weapons. The majority of countries in the world are really fed up with the foot dragging on disarmament, and they're orchestrating an end run around the 9 nuclear states. The UN negotiations is a long-sought breakthrough for the disarmament community and the countries who feel held hostage by weapons they don't possess. Former parliamentarian Douglas Roche, like many in the Canadian disarmament community, there's only one thing wrong with the UN. Canada isn't taking part, he said. I see this exercise in a very positive terms, and it's shocking that Canada is not going to participate. Mr. Speaker, the 2 greatest security threats in our world today are cyber warfare and terrorism. The proliferation of nuclear weapons makes it all the more likely that somewhere, eventually, a country's system will be without the cyber defense measures needed to protect it from an attack. All the more likely that a nuclear weapon will be lost or stolen or end up in the hands that would choose to use it. I'm looking for our government, Mr. Speaker, to lead again in the world community towards peace and nuclear disarmament. If ever there was a time and a place for Canadian leadership, it is now at the UN at the table negotiating a ban on nuclear weapons. I implore all Canadians, the majority of which